Israel versus Palestine. And I know that even saying that sentence means I'm losing followers online and I'm on the verge of being blocked on all social media and in life. That's how contentious this topic is. I mean, before you even finish the sentence, people are like, "You idiot, how dare you, shut the hell up." But guys, we have to talk about it because this is one of the most difficult stories that has existed in our lifetime. I mean, there are lots of fights that seem like they'll never come to an end. You know, India versus Pakistan, China versus Tibet, white people versus rhythm. But Israel versus Palestine is a 73-year-old beef that has stumped everybody. I mean, when it stumped Jared, you knew that this thing was difficult. But the paradox is that because Israel and Palestine has been ongoing for so long, people forget that it is ongoing. That is until there are flare-ups that the world cannot ignore, which is what happened again this week.
Overnight, a deadly barrage from Israeli forces lighting up the skies over Gaza. And in the West Bank, warning sirens echoing through Bethlehem. Earlier, Palestinian militant groups firing more than 200 rockets into Israel. Most of the Hamas rockets stopped by Israel's missile defense system, or they fell short. Israeli strikes reportedly killing at least 23 people, including 9 children. Israel saying the dead were militants. At least 6 Israelis were reported injured. Tensions have been escalating over Israeli moves to evict Palestinian families from their homes in East Jerusalem. They boiled over as more than 100 worshippers and protesters were injured as Israeli police stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque using tear gas and rubber bullets.
Yes, this week, the conflict escalated again. And now, dozens of people are dead, including children. And look, man, what makes Israel-Palestine such a difficult topic to even broach is all the layers that are packed into it. No matter how much you try and break it down, people are always going to say that you're leaving out some crucial piece of context. And you know what the truth is? They're probably right. I mean, there's the history of how Israel became a state after Nazi Germany tried to destroy the Jewish people. But there's also the history of the British taking the land from the Palestinians. Not to mention that every other country in the region has its own issues and its own agendas. And then on top of all of that, there's religion involved. And I don't care what anybody says, man, religion is the one thing that has never calmed any situation when there's a clash. And you know what makes it even harder? Is the fact that who's right and who's wrong always seems to change depending on when you start measuring time. This week was the perfect example of it. If you start from Israel fired rockets into Gaza, well then Israel is the bad guy because they're bombing Gaza. But then you take a step back in time, you go, well, Hamas fired rockets at Israel. Well then Hamas is the bad guy. But then you take a step back and you go, but the Israeli police, they went in and started beating people up in a mosque during Ramadan, the most holy time in the Muslim calendar. Well, then Israel is the bad guy. But then you go, well, the Palestinians, they were throwing rocks. Well, the Israelis, they were kicking people out of their homes. Well, the Intifada, well, Israel keeps taking more and more land. Well, the Arab invasion, and back and back and back, and who knows how far. Like, you probably find the first cavemen who hit each other with clubs were probably Israeli and Palestinian. I don't know. And look, I don't want to have that argument. I want to have that argument and the noise that goes back and forth in this thing because honestly, I don't think that any TV show in 10 minutes is going to come close to solving Israel-Palestine. And 10 minutes isn't even enough time to explain the Mortal Kombat conflict. So I'm not even trying to come in and do that, right? I'm not trying to do that. The part where we say who's good and who's bad and who started, let's step away from that and instead ask a different question. Instead, let's look at who's dead and who's alive this week. In Gaza, Israeli airstrikes have reportedly killed 28 people, including 10 children. Over 150 people have been wounded. In Israel, Hamas rockets have killed 2 people. And this exchange of fire comes after the Israeli assault in and around the Al-Aqsa Mosque that left more than 600 Palestinian protesters, worshippers, and civilians wounded, and a few dozen Israeli police. Now, personally, I'm not saying for you, just personally, I cannot watch that footage and hear those numbers and see a fair fight. Like, set aside motives and intentions and just look at technology alone. Israel has one of the most powerful militaries in the world. They can crush Gaza like that. Not to mention one of the most advanced defense systems in the world. You shoot a rocket at them, it's probably not going to do anything to them because of their defense system. Right? They've got a giant Mutombo in the sky just knocking them down. And I know that this is contentious. And I know that people are going to hate me for this. But I just want to ask an honest question here. If you are in a fight where the other person cannot beat you, how hard should you retaliate when they try to hurt you? Honest question. And I ask this question because I think of it like this. When I was a teenager, I would always get into fights with my little brothers. And little kids can be vicious, right? They're trying to punch you in the leg, they're trying to punch you in the nuts. They're kids, they do that. But my mom would say to me, whenever I get angry, she'd go, Trevor, don't hit the kid back because they can't hurt you. You're a teenager and the kid is 4. And I was like, yeah, but the kid is hitting me. He could hurt me. But my mom was like, yeah, but you're also so much bigger than the kid. You can crush him in an instant. And please don't get me wrong right now, because I know someone's going to watch this and go like, oh, you're comparing Palestinians to children. No, I'm not doing that. I'm telling a story about myself. Honestly, I am. Because what my mom made me understand is that as a person who has immensely more power, I had to ask myself whether my response to this child was just or necessary. Could I find different ways to deal with this? Whether I felt aggrieved or not, or whether they were fighting fair, was almost irrelevant. Was I even able to ask myself the question about why they were doing what they're doing? Was I willing to admit guilt? This was all part of the question that I had to ask myself. But the main question I ask in this situation is about power. And please, again, I know this is not a great analogy, because I'm not saying Palestinians are children. I'm not just saying they're all children, right? I'm not saying that they're harmless or that they're irrational or acting out. I'm not saying any of that. I'm not. I'm just talking about the difference in power, which is something we do all the time. I mean, think about policing. If a man has a knife, should the cops shoot him? In many parts around the world, like in the UK, they say, well, we're going to do everything we can to try and not shoot the person, even at risk to ourselves, because at the end of the day, they brought a knife to a gunfight. So what's the right response? Well, I mean, everyone has a different answer to the question, and I'm not trying to answer the question, nor do I think I'm smart enough to solve it. All I'm asking is, when you have this much power, what is your responsibility?